So there are growing concerns around how long it'll actually take to extradite the Gupta brothers after they were arrested in Dubai. Atul and Rajesh Gupta were wanted in connection with the 24.9 million rand that was paid by the Free State Agriculture Department for a feasibility study on potential farming projects in that province. Since their arrest, the NPA has confirmed that they are engaging with stakeholders in the UAE to fast-track the extradition process. For more on this story, still a big one, let's bring in Open Secrets Director Hennie van Vuuren, who joins us now via our video link. Great to have you on the program as always, Hennie. Thanks very much indeed for making time. Some time has passed now since this story broke in the country, and I wonder whether or not you still have any major questions around what the way forward looks like.
Yeah, good morning, Ayanda. I mean, indeed, I think it's a really important step, though. I think we need to recognize that we've been demanding, and civil society certainly has been on the streets for years, demanding that everyone implicated in state capture, whether it's the corporations, the politicians, or for that matter, the Gupta family, need to be held to account for their crimes, given the impact it's had on human rights in South Africa. And so I think the step in terms of arresting the Guptas, finally, this is after how long the NPA and South African authorities have been attempting to ensure this happens, is a really important one. But I think rightly, as you say, there are, I think, many open questions. This isn't sort of a slam dunk case of them now being arrested, and extradition is going to follow very quickly. If anything, I mean, just starting by the reaction we've seen from the National Prosecuting Authority, from Minister Lamola, one gets a sense that there wasn't a coordinated plan even how to communicate this to the South African people, and then I think is because the South African authorities were possibly some of the last to know that the Guptas have been arrested. It doesn't suggest a coordination between the authorities in the UAE and the South African authorities by any measure, and it puts the South African authorities in the back foot to the extent that they now have to organize a crack team. The A team of South African prosecutors have to get on a plane and get to Dubai urgently to ensure that these wanted criminals are not allowed to be given bail, so that they can escape to their bolt holes in India or Uzbekistan and wherever else they've stashed the cash they've stolen from South Africans.
Yeah. In fact, you've also tweeted that we shouldn't trust the UAE's motives here, describing that country as a haven for money laundering. I mean, do you have any doubts that, you know, the arrest of the Guptas was for anything outside of the ends of justice?
Yeah, and I think it's incredibly important for us to remember that, as you say, the United Arab Emirates, Dubai, as we popularly know it as a shopping destination for the very wealthy in South Africa, is also an international center for the world's criminal economy. Those shiny towers in the desert have partly been built off illicit financial flows, money that's often stolen wealth from countries on the African continent, in Asia and elsewhere. And they use the law firms, the accounting firms, the offshore centers. So there's a strong culture of secrecy in the UAE. It's a very repressive regime as well in terms of its human rights abuses. So the ability to express one's opinion is limited in that country. And so all of that enables these very large companies to operate as from this tax haven. The result, of course, is that it's in the interest of the UAE to preserve that system. Now, what we do know, Ayanda, is that very recently, earlier this year, in fact, a group called the Financial Action Task Force, the FATF, which is basically the club of the world's richest nations who've been working against money laundering and the financing of terrorism for the past 30 years, they evaluate countries regularly, and then they place them on either, if you like, a green list, a grey list, or a list of the worst offenders in terms of money laundering and the financing of terrorism. This year, the United Arab Emirates was moved to a grey list, so a watch list. Now, by comparison, just to say that Zimbabwe until recently was on that grey list, and it has huge impact for the potential for the potential for Dubai to continue to operate as financial sector. What the UAE is involved in right now is damage control, and part of that is a propaganda exercise, no doubt, and attempts to supposedly reform their system to make sure they get taken off this list. Now, that is a game that's much bigger than the South African story of the Guptas. I think the concern is what's happened here is the UAE is very happy to arrest the Guptas. It sends a strong message to London and to Paris and Washington, D.C., see that they are tough on money laundering because they're going after these international criminals. Whether they'll actually see that through is questionable. And one of the reasons for that, of course, Ayanda, is that the courts aren't independent. The judicial system in the UAE isn't the same as the South African judicial system. UN Special Rapporteur on the independence of the judiciary visited the UAE some years ago and said very clearly the judiciary is controlled by the security sector and by the executive, by the head of state directly. So we may very well be maybe party to the whims of these various political interests. And their interest, in the final point there, Ayanda, is not necessarily to upend the system that's made Dubai rich. They need to keep that system running. So there may be the look of justice that's about to happen, but I think we're up against an enormous legal battle if the South Africans want to ensure the Guptas get back to South Africa in order to stand trial. And that means every single thing needs to be thrown at this legal battle by the head of the NPA and her leadership team right now.
Fascinating. I wonder what that means for how much trust the NPA can have on their counterparts in the UAE, given the picture you've painted, and given the fact that the reality is officials this side can't pull this off alone, at least not the first step, which involves getting the Guptas to South Africa.
Yeah, so they certainly can't pull it off alone, but there is going to be a court hearing, a bail hearing, which will probably take place in the next week or so, Ayanda. Now, my understanding, and from what I've heard, is the Gupta's legal team has already arrived in Dubai. So they are already in Dubai looking to prepare a case for the Guptas. They've flown from Johannesburg to do that. So that means that in the game of chess, they're already a couple steps ahead of the NPA. We certainly haven't heard from the National Director of Public Prosecutions who her team is, who is going to lead her team, on which flight they will be on their way to Dubai. So it's not just this is not only a long game. There's a matter of urgency right now, Ayanda, that those South African, I want to say that that is the A team that needs to be sent to Dubai to ensure that they ensure that the bail isn't granted as a first step to the Gupta brothers, because it might very well be that the Guptas then very easily manage to escape Dubai. And again, I think we need to see this in the realm of who has interests here. The interests of the UAE and Dubai do not necessarily align with that of a democratic South Africa. I think we need to recognize that first and foremost. And once we're aware of that, I think then one thinks differently about how you're going to approach this and with the seriousness of it. But we can't see the continued mistakes that the NPA has made in the ability to hold the state to capture elite to account until now continue to prevail. This is going to be a fundamental test for the leadership of the National Prosecuting Authority. And if they fail at this, then they have failed the South African people.
Sure. The nuance you bring into this is fascinating. If, let's say, the NPA team does pick up that the UAE's motives here aren't all too altruistic, does that justify them walking away, as it were, even on the basis of principle, given what's at stake, given, as you've mentioned, the fact that so many South Africans are relying on this to be a success, so that at least it feels that some movement, meaningful way, is being made in the fight against state capture?
Yeah, well, I think they need to outplay the UAE, and I think it's recognizing it's stop pretending now that you're just dealing with a normal state. This is again, Ayanda, remind ourselves, the UAE is not only a center for the international one of the centers for international criminal economy. Many of the others are in places like Europe and the Caribbean and elsewhere that are tax havens. But importantly, it was, together with places like Hong Kong, a center for the Guptas to move their own money. So it's not only that the Guptas happened to like to have fancy apartments in Dubai. They used exactly those front companies in Dubai as part of their global money laundering network. If the Guptas' network is fully exposed, the extent to which companies in the UAE are complicit in these crimes will, with that, be fully exposed, and that's going to expose the interests of very rich people in the UAE and presumably in Dubai as well. So I think it is crucial, not only in the interest of justice in South Africa, but also to strike a blow against this type of practice that the UAE has profited from, that we take this seriously. We don't walk away from this. And when we say we, that really is the NPA representing the South African people. They need to uphold the rule of law in South South Africa and the international system, the rule of law. And that means they need to muck in and they need to put the very best case forward right now. And again, I think that's why we stress no half measures right now. We need to take this incredibly seriously, precisely because the odds are stacked up against us and against the real prospect of accountability prevailing.
Sure, we've reached the top of this mountain only to realize there's so many other mountains to climb. Hennie van Vuuren, thanks very much indeed for your take on this. Really do appreciate your time. Henry is the Director of Open Secrets.